tell you'll have some news stories tonight.
Hey, my favorite commander is back. Ready to get started? That one might make all the difference. Have a good battle, friend. Nice work out there. Keep up the pressure.
Okay.
You watching TV?
No, I'm streaming. I'm trying to fix my stream quality.
Yeah.
But YouTube's being weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you can win this thing. Welcome back. How's it going out there?
I got your order for you.
The odds are in my favor.
Better hire a recruit while you can.
Nice.
I got your order for you.
Part, it's just a normal center-left trans community that occasionally makes fun of the cringe teenagers on Tumblr, on TikTok mostly nowadays. All of this is to say, if a trans person is labeled true scum on the internet, don't assume they're a bad person or hold bigoted views. Now for the most important part, do you need dysphoria to be trans? I believe that in order to be considered transgender, or at least not in a separate category, you ought to have current or alleviated gender dysphoria. If you don't have gender dysphoria, that means you have no negative feelings about remaining in your assigned birth gender presentation or identification.
Of course.
What?
Your minions really pulled their weight.
What'd you say?
identification. At this point, it seems to me like a person just wants to be transgender because they just choose to. Transgender, a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their birth sex. That sense of personal identity is an immutable characteristic. You can't help this. This isn't a choice. You've argued this several times before on stream. It's who I am inside. I have difficulty believing that there are people in good faith saying that who they are on the inside is opposite their birth gender, but legitimately have no negative feelings about staying that way they were assigned at birth. If these people exist, they may as well not identify as trans because they're not really any different than people who aren't trans but want to be the opposite gender because they think it's cool. It actually reminds me of the champagne socialist argument you had with Vaush. Even if these people technically fit the definition, they're not really worth talking about when discussing the difficulties of the group as a whole. I and many others in the true scum community have a pretty low bar for what is considered dysphoria. I don't think you need to be in the process of transitioning. If you can't because of your financial situation, because you live in an unsupportive family or community, that's fine. You can still be trans. You don't have to have dysphoria bad enough to be suicidal. You don't need to get sex reassignment surgery. The point is, you want to be the opposite gender if everything was perfect, and importantly, not want to stay in your current gender assignment.
You're good at this.
Oh, halfway done. Get some more water, guys.
Practice makes perfect.
I'll clean you up.
I'll poll again at 20 emails. We want to finish them all. 16. What changed my life was facial feminization surgery. At 13 months, I had FFS with arguably the best surgeon for $50,000, which my insurance fully paid for thanks to my cushy engineering job. And suddenly I started presenting as me 100% of the time. Initially, I was very much an activist. I used my Instagram to advocate for pro-trans causes, to raise awareness of anti-trans legislation, etc. Part of this was me wanting to give back to others like me, to help create a future where trans people wouldn't have to wait until 27 to feel like they could transition without throwing away their chance at a happy life. I grew up steeped in media that made me hate who I was. Maury and Jerry Springer shows featuring trans people were some of the only media I could find that featured real-life trans people, and those depictions were so negative. These are people who were subjecting themselves to this ridicule to survive. I didn't see any hyper-successful engineers or business people that were trans that I could look up to. And now that I was this person I'd wished society would show me, I wanted to be visible. Fast forward to now, this isn't quite the case anymore. I still feel similarly, in that I hope trans people don't face what I faced growing up, and don't have to be afraid of being disowned and ruining their lives by coming out to their parents, for example. But I no longer engage very much in the online advocacy outlets. I started out really engaged in early on. I just can't relate to the online trans community in so many ways. I have a few really close trans girlfriends in real life that I adore. Most of them identify as heterosexual and are in relationships with men, and for all of us, being trans is just one part of who we are, and not really a major facet at that. I don't hide that I'm trans. I'm still open that I am on social media and with friends, but in real life situations, I don't want every person I interact with to know that I'm trans. My whole identity and set of interests aren't derived from that aspect of my identity. Also, I do feel like some of the online Twitter trans advocates are advocating for causes that will end up hurting our progress as a community, will cause more real transphobia to manifest. And to be totally honest, I'd be really afraid that if I spoke up about these feelings, I would have crazy people trying to get me fired and ruin my life. Number 17. Basically, trans communities online are super mega extreme. People use positions of authority to convince kids to get on hormones with no accountability or regulation, which is really dangerous and reflects on the trans community and feeds into the grooming kids narrative, as well as banning anyone who dissents or isn't super ooh-woo hug boxing. Secondly, it hurts so much to be demonized by other trans people online. I can't go to many trans communities online because they all inevitably become super ooh-woo validating, ooh-woo hug boxing. If you go against any of this, you're put in the trans medicalist label, which has tons of really bad associations. Like any level of dissent or like disagreement when it comes to these spaces, you are cast out. It's really fucking alienating. These spaces also are super hug boxing, saying everyone passes, which can be dangerous to younger people who may be attacked. You can already understand this, but it's really scary that these that there are people in these communities online that are like figures of authority, like admin mods or big community members who convince these kids to get on do-it-yourself HRT with no accountability. And when this shit goes wrong, it reflects back on the entire trans community. Basically, it is a huge fester that grows in online spaces that pushes out literally all not-extreme people out of the spaces to spare everyone's feelings and engages in very dangerous actions. TLDR for the next section, all online content creators but you and some others engage or encourage this behavior I talked about above, and it is very scary. Because I feel like we are barreling towards undoing a lot of progress and making things materially worse for a lot of trans people with how ideologically bought into positions they are. Because it is just a fact of reality, these online people gain more and more real-life influence every day as more and more people tune into Twitch and into their streams, and they grow especially within the trans community. Thirdly, I feel like all online political communicators for trans issues engage in all of these terrible behaviors I've explained above. It's really scary. I go door to door for local elections, and if I had to like repeat talking points for a Democrat that like Vosh, Demon Mama, or Josie or Maddie or any of these people say, I genuinely fear for my life. I'm scared. I love politics, and I don't like being doomer-pilled. But Steven, I'm genuinely scared. Deep down, things are going to get significantly worse before they get better. I fear we're heading towards this edge, but we have already hit the velocity to where it's too late to stop. I'm scared for my future. I know that society won't fall. I know trans people probably won't be gunned down in America. I'm not delusional, but I'm afraid of hate crimes going up. I'm afraid of losing my friends. I'm afraid I'll have to quit politics that makes me happy. I'm too emotional at the moment to keep writing. I'm super sorry this is so long. I just care so deeply for all of this, and I feel like as things online become more prominent, literally in my college clubs, in a progressive meeting. And I feel like this as things online become more prominent, literally in my college clubs and at a progressive meeting I went to a while ago.
Everyone's gunning for you. Watch out.
I'm so glad that suffering is not necessary for many young trans people these days. On the other hand, how people speak about trans issues now is troubling, putting so much emphasis on everyone and every gender being valid, to the point where you could probably categorize any normal person as non-binary because it's all so encompassing. This makes zero sense and leads us to the xenogender discourse, which I would like to go away forever. The biggest reason I'm grateful for your voice is because I begin to lose faith in people. I began to lose hope that people still thought like I do when I joined discourse on Twitter and spoke against xenogenders. I got death threats and people encouraging my suicide, including from prominent people in the Demon Mama community. Further, I believe this de-emphasis I see on medical transition in these communities is troubling. Who will fight for that for us if we have half of trans people saying medical transition is unnecessary to be valid? Let me drink one second. Gender dysphoria at number 19. Gender dysphoria is about as close to an IRL body horror as you can get. Being trapped in a body that you know isn't right for you is hell. I constantly worried about my appearance. I fretted over things no one else would notice, and I always felt like I was taking up space for real, cis women. Online, everyone might go, yes, queen, you're so valid, of course, Roman, you look so good. But those are just words, and most of the time, they feel like lies. Sometimes they are. The reality of being trans is, if someone can tell you are trans, if they can clock you, they almost never consider you a member of the gender you identify as. You're a fucked up man or woman, or, depending on how bigoted they are, just a thing to them. Number 20. When I've been discriminated against at past jobs, my most significant non-one-off experiences with bigotry was never because my coworkers got bad opinions about trans people from dipshits on the internet. It was because there were, so this is like an email from the other end. Not every single email I got agreed with me, so I tried to include a couple. There weren't as many that disagreed with me, maybe because of my fans or whatever, but I tried to include the ones that would have other points of view as well. When I've been discriminated against at past jobs, my most significant non-one-off experiences with bigotry, it was never because my coworkers got bad opinions about trans people from dipshits on the internet. It was because they were conservative types that hated me because I was early in my transition. I looked like a weird guy in my Waffle House uniform because I was on HRT and wore makeup, and I sounded like a girl because of voice training. I don't think most people care about the online shit. It's just an excuse they use. They'd use some other excuse for why they don't like you if they didn't have that. The other worst sorts of experiences I've had were in college when I thought people legitimately wanted to be my friend, but it turned out that they actually just clocked me and wanted to sit me down to ask me some personal questions about being trans before they moved on and didn't talk to me again. I cannot tell you how many times someone has asked me if I've gotten the surgery after talking to me for less than 5 minutes. Oof, okay. We're at 21. Do we want to finish the rest of the emails? I think we're going to. I think it's important to hear it, even if you guys don't like it. I'm not pulling it. 21. I feel like I have pretty mild gender dysphoria from stories I've read. I used to absolutely despise looking at myself in the mirror, avoided people taking photos like they would kill me. I spent hours upon hours a week plucking hair, one by one, out of my body, and starved myself to the point of looking like I was in a concentration camp. I've thankfully been able to mostly solve these issues by taking care of my skin, living a more healthy lifestyle via eating well and working out, and dressing and acting more feminine. I 100% feel like I am an oddity when going outside with my nails painted, carrying a handbag with feminine mannerisms, but I can actually function like that compared to previously where I used to struggle to place an order at a fast food restaurant. I have an appointment with an endocrinologist booked, although still months out to see if HRT is a good solution for me, and I'm testing the waters to see if I want to slowly transition. I will say that there's been a weirdly scary amount of people who I have come across along my journey to figure out what the actual fuck is wrong with me, who claim to be trans, to not understand gender dysphoria. Seem to not understand gender dysphoria, which ends up making me feel fucking insane. It is legit frustrating joining a community of people who seem to think it's just fun or fashionable to be trans and don't seem to have any reason to have transitioned in the first place. It's even more frustrating having people try and convince me that I'm currently trans due to the way I present and act, even though I really haven't done anything yet. It seems fucking bizarre that it seems like the bare minimum to be trans is to just act or dress non-conforming to your assigned gender. All the recent stuff in the news, thanks to the, in my opinion, retardation in America over trans issues, which then has spiraled into arguments on social media, has legit made me feel unwell for weeks at a time due to me wishing I had nothing in common with these people. While there are some very good vocal pro-trans voices out there, it feels like the vast majority make it seem like an insane cult. While thankfully, this has made me rethink my approach to potentially transitioning, has made me more cautious, I feel it would be easier for people like me if we just faded back into the background and went somewhat unnoticed. 22. Hello, I'm watching your latest video and the subject of toxic online trans communities came up, and at 53 minutes you mentioned that you get emails from trans people saying that they also hate the toxic online trans community and that they believe it makes their online experience worse. If you have a list of trans people who feel this way, feel free to add me to it. The people who make me feel ashamed of being trans are those toxic online trans people. They make me feel like I can deeply understand why so many conservatives despise the left. Even on Reddit, the only way I can seem to get through to radical trans people is by pulling out my trans badge, and even then they seem to tend to just ghost me afterwards. '23. I see so much straight hate from online queer communities. It almost feels like queer people have been otherized and demonized for so long that they begun to start otherizing themselves. Breaks my heart. All I want is to feel like I belong and am accepted. It upsets me so deeply to see so many voices and opinions echoed that are full of so much hate and disdain. It only serves to further divide the very people that we should be working to build relations with. 24. I'm not active in trans circles in real life anymore, and neither is my friend, even though at first we'd go to the local trans associations every week. And if you were to go to an association anywhere, you'll notice that besides a few exceptions, it's almost only questioning or early trans people that are in there. I don't think the reason is, in most cases, is that people can't vibe with uwu xenogenders. It's because that when you start transitioning, it's an explosion in your life, positive and negative. Being trans is central to your experience, always on your thoughts, etc. You need validation to be reassured, to feel that you're not alone, and also advice for admin and medical stuff. But as time goes on, it's been a few years, while you're more confident, you're now less of a trans and just a woman, or a man, or an NB. Life goes on, you don't think about it much. These places just aren't for you anymore. Also, most trans people cringe at who they were at the beginning of their transition, kind of like how you cringe at your teenage self. I think it's very easy for older, when I say older, I mean time since realizing you're trans, not just old since birth, trans people to forget how they were and just judge the behavior and insecurities of younger trans people. A lot of early trans people are very angry at society and the system because their life is shit and people are mean to them constantly in real life. Again, it's easy for passing trans women or men to look at that anger and be annoyed because, well, now we're pretty well integrated. Almost nobody knows that we're trans. They give us a bad rap, they're too mean, etc. I'm not saying there's no truth in it, but it's also because we now just want quiet and peace because we are the good ones. We look and act like the gender we are, so even if someone learns that we're trans, they'll probably react neutrally or positively. However, that's not the experience of these younger trans people. They get insulted and mocked, and they're often going through tough shit with their family. They're losing friends. We don't have the same problems they do, or even the same political interests necessarily. They want shit to change fast and drastically. We want to be more integrated and left alone. 6 more.
That's what I would have picked.
I don't think someone has to transition medically to be to be transgender, but I do think there has to be some underlying discomfort with the way you're perceived and or the way your body looks. You can't just be an AFAB who puts she, they in your bio and has no desire of going any further than that and then claim to be transgender. This dilutes the meaning of the word to an absurd degree and delegitimizes us more than we already are. I also don't feel at home in most trans communities. It feels like I'm having to walk on eggshells to make sure I don't say anything that could be misconstrued as invalidating, and it's extremely mindfucky. I saw a post the other day on RMTF where someone said, "I wish I were a girl," frowny face. And while some of the comments understood what she meant and responded accordingly, there were a lot of people berating her and telling her that she couldn't be posting stuff like that and that she obviously already was a girl. Sorry. Already was a girl, and that posting anything outside of that sentiment made other people in the sub feel bad. This is reflective of a larger problem with queer people are being called out or ousted from queer communities if their language and or opinions don't 100% match with the current progressive rule book. Hesitant towards the use of neopronouns, don't say anything or risk being demonized and rejected from the community, and then have absolutely nowhere else to go because 95% of all queer communities follow pretty much the same guidelines. Same with trans sports, discussions on words like tranny, transsexual, AGP, etc., medical transition for kids, having police outside of anarcho-communism, etc., etc. Why should trans people have to tone police themselves to such an absurd degree and make sure to only use language that's fully inclusive and go out of their way to cater towards everyone's ego? These issues are messy and deserve to be discussed. Whoa, shit. These issues are messy and deserve to be discussed in a way that acknowledges that. Woke scolds across the internet, most prevalent on TikTok and Twitter in my opinion, make being trans even harder than it has to be because now I have to watch how I act and what I say, not only around conservatives, but also queer people. I want to be able to give an opinion like trans women probably shouldn't be competing in sports with cis women without some white cis ally or a dozen 14-year-old trans people telling me I'm transphobic. 26. Most people would agree that people like Shapiro and Crowder aren't helpful for trans people due to similar reasons, which I agree with. On the other hand, I personally think people like Demon Mama or maybe even Vosh nowadays are doing a similar disservice to people like me. Nowadays, you don't even need a Ben Shapiro to make trans people sound ridiculous. The online trans community is doing it for them, which is so much more frustrating to me since the harm to trans people like myself isn't as obvious anymore when lefties are advocating for neopronouns than when some conservative calls trans people mentally challenged. I personally felt the need to clarify to every person I came out to as trans that I'm not an online trans person, even though I'm mostly online and a trans person. It's exhausting. To be clear, I don't hate people like Demon Mama. I think they just aren't aware of what they're doing to some trans people and how it affects us. I don't even necessarily have a problem with people identifying with autism or as a deer in some abstract way. It is a part of their identity, and if it makes them happy, go for it. I just think it should not be under the same umbrella as gender identity and therefore treated a bit differently. I also don't like to use the word transphobic anymore. The term is so inflationary nowadays to the point to where anybody that disagrees with a trans person whatsoever can be called a transphobe. I have some progressive friends, and it feels kind of humiliating when they clearly don't want to talk to me about certain topics because they feel like their opinion might come off as transphobic, even though their thoughts might be reasonable. Sometimes it feels like I am left out of good conversations due to me being trans. 27 out of 31. We've almost made it, guys. I am a college student, sorry. I've been watching your content for about a year. My best friend is a trans man, and I have plenty of other trans friends. Being active in LGBTQ plus groups at my school, I've come to learn that, for the most part, no one in real life respects the online trans activists. I'm sure you've gotten emails after emails about this recently, but I'd like to add my 2 cents. Trans men are seriously fucked over. You've mentioned this on your stream a few times, and it's true. Every issue is centered around trans women. On the right, it's because they fear that it's perverted men, etc., and on the left, it's because of the way too vocal online communities. The problem is, these communities claim to represent trans people, but all trans people I know want nothing to do with them. Lately, I've been talking to my trans friends about this a lot, and they feel like they're being used as a political pawn for a culture war that they didn't sign up for. Makes me depressed to see these bad faith political actors are using a group of people that already have it rough to advance an agenda. 28. I'm a 22-year-old trans female nursing student at a private religious university in the South. I'm not rich or religious. I'm only here for scholarship money. Being a private religious institution, they will not allow any official organizations for LGBT people or anybody left of Democrat. This led to the creation of an unofficial LGBT group club organized over Discord. After the original leadership of the server graduated last year, it has been taken over by the most terminally lefty-brained dumbfucks who use the word gender in practically every other sentence, who are only here because of their parents' money. Usually, I would stay away from these types of people, but it's hard finding friends who will openly associate with a trans person at a religious university. For reference, a majority of the student body doesn't agree with gay marriage, and the conservative club is functionally a groyper club. It's extremely alienating because this is a relatively large group, and I don't feel like a single person here has the same experience with their gender as I do. They use it as an accessory that you change every few weeks instead of an identity. The other trans people don't experience dysphoria or do anything to further their transition. The only other person on HRT was a trans guy who was socially pushed out of the group for being slightly conservative. The most alienating thing, though, is when they talk in the Discord about how they want to make cis people feel uncomfortable and be more visibly trans, which both sound like nightmare scenarios to me. It's really scary to me when the people advocating for trans stuff at my school are making me, a trans person, feel almost transphobic. Just almost. 3 more. With time, I came to realize that trans online communities are extremely toxic. They overfixate on acceptance and validation to the point of insanity. Subreddits that were dedicated to educating and poking fun at trans people in denial have become toxic sewers in which they dare to speak up against their current beliefs. You're immediately shunned. If you dare to speak up against their current beliefs, you're immediately shunned, silenced, and called a transphobe or a true scum. All reason in civil discourse has been silenced. The obsession with being valid runs rampant. They do not care whether they're right or wrong. The only thing they care to look online is validation and blind acceptance. It deeply saddens me because it's going to lead to a massive outburst in transphobia. Wait, I think... Holy shit. It should only be 30 emails. I think I copied part of this twice. Whoops. Well, now I have to reread all the other ones again, too, since I read that person's twice. Hold on. Nice job, proofreaders. I put all the proofreaders at the start, so if there's fucked up shit in here, you can blame them, okay?
A good tactical choice.
Two more. I see people like Vosh, who are neither trans nor a woman, effectively meaning he is nothing more than a cis man, making misogynistic comments in the name of trans activism, or people saying maybe we shouldn't have women in sports, etc. I see it for what it is, a fucking goldmine for TERFs to capitalize on. The misogyny from Vosh is the best recruiting material in the world. It cannot be understated how good it is for them. It is the trans discourse equivalent of proof of WMDs in comparison to comments like maybe we should do away with women in sports, which is more akin to an ISIS beheading video. It does far more harm for trans women, because TERFs usually have to point to crazy or misogynistic things that trans activists say that come from people like Demon Mama, who happen to be trans, and no one can really argue that Demon Mama isn't part of an oppressed group, so there's still that discomfort because her word can be hand-waved as an oppressed person punching up, or just an oppressed person being frustrated at a perceived oppressor. Meanwhile, Vosh as a cis man is perceived to be speaking from the position of a group of people who are the facilitators of gendered oppression, or have been throughout history, so his words carry a lot more weight than some frustrated trans woman, because TERFs can use it and point to it as, see, men are just using trans ideology to oppress us. It is a lot easier to develop a boogeyman or an enemy when you develop a narrative that your enemy is supported by a group of people who have historically held all the power in the first place. Final email. I've been watching through the recent nonsensical trans sports debate debacle and all of the associated drama, and holy fucking shit, it is perpetually exhausting to be someone who literally just wants to vibe and be treated as a normal girl, but to have your entire existence dragged out into the open and paraded around like some sort of freak of a lost cause for a bunch of purposeless, perpetually online dipshits to group around and pat themselves on the back so hard they leave a bruise. All the while, the only feeling I ever have is like they painted a target on my forehead and kicked me out to the front of the crowd, cheering and telling me that it's for my own good, while they sit back and face none of the repercussions for the stupid shit they say or advocate for on my behalf. Honestly speaking, it feels exactly like the same shit I've always dealt with, except instead of being told I'm wrong for existing or telling me I'm a freak and that I should be cut out of my rights or cut out of consideration for my own good, I'm told that I need to shut up and let them speak for me now because they're here to save me from myself once again. You mentioned a bunch of things recently that really stood out to me and legit made me feel like, yes, someone fucking gets it. Like when you mentioned how you had the impression that trans women didn't want extra visibility or to be treated special for being trans, that the whole concept or idea was just being or becoming an average woman. And yes, absolutely, that's all I've ever really wanted. That was what most people I knew and people I know in real life felt or worked towards. I've quipped before, fuck trans acceptance, I want trans indifference, because that best reflects how I really feel about it. I want my status as trans to be one of the least important, least interesting things about me, because in my own mind it already is. A lot of these absolute specimens that you have the displeasure of talking to online, though, I notice this really huge difference in perspective that I can only really sum up as like, I wonder how many of them actually identify as woman, and how many of them identify as trans woman. It's like that old difference between a girl gamer and a gamer girl. Yeah? I feel like I'm just a woman. I identify as a woman, and that makes me trans, but for some reason for some of these people, being trans seems to deadass be the goal, and that is so fucking wild and so fucking uncomfortable for me, honestly. I'm not entirely sure how to really sum that up or apply some sort of sorting algorithm to filter these people out or differentiate them from the poor normie fucks like me who just want to vibe, but it's been something on my mind for sure. Additionally, it feels so wildly, absurdly fucking uncomfortable seeing the plethora of cis male presenting dipshits out here claiming ownership or expertise on trans discussions and dictating rules or claiming total ownership over trans positions when I just feel like, shut the fuck up. You don't speak for me. None of this affects you. You get to go home after your shitty debates and stare slack-jawed at your computer screen while I'm the one who gets thrown under the bus for all of your bullshit. It's incredibly frustrating, and it just seems to have gotten worse with time. So I'm 30 now. I originally came from old 4chan nonsense before there even was a political board. I was an edgy kid who was, like a lot of folks back then, just some social reject who liked edgy jokes and Japanese culture nonsense. I wound up finding a community there and had a bunch of fun, back when all of the stupid racism and Nazi shit was legitimately a joke, before the word got out that 4chan was full of racist Nazis and all the edgy kids making offensive jokes got lawed out of existence by mainstream dipshits, flooding in, missing the point that all the edgy shit was only funny because it was untrue. Kind of like that time you mentioned when someone took you saying faggot seriously and went, yeah, screw them gays, and you had to do a double take on, what do you mean? That's not what I meant in the slightest. Back then, the thing that really got me out of my shell was, hilariously, all of the fucking trap threads. I had considered all the trans stuff, but all the trans spaces were a bunch of ugly, bitter, 40-year-old women with hardcore sexist views on what being a woman is like. You want to play games? You want to watch anime? You want to tell jokes? Oh no, honey, that's not feminine enough. And all the needlessly exhausting drama that hasn't changed to this very day. I was deeply off-put by that, but I looked up to the traps as these fucking amazing people. They were chill, they were funny, they were cute as heck, and they just did what they liked, played games, had interest, had actual personalities. For a long time, I proudly proclaimed that I wasn't trans. I was totally a trap. But of course, times change, and so did the context of that word. Suddenly, that playful term that represented my whole identity and the things I looked up to changed, and overnight, everyone recognized it as a term of hate speech. No amount of argument was good enough. No debate could ever really be won. People argued with all these personal anecdotes about their personal fears on trans panic being used to murder them because some edgy dipshits online used the term trap, and all of my own personal fears or personal experiences didn't matter in the slightest because they didn't align with the popular narrative, you know? That was when I realized that all of the personal anecdotes and this thin veneer of protecting people's feelings or representing people's experiences or standing up for people's unique lived history was all a bunch of horse shit that nobody actually believed. It just looks nice on a resume when you're trying to fluff yourself up to look better. I gave up on that fight, and fine, whatever. I guess I'm begrudgingly under the trans label now, but that was still one of those early things that made me really put off by trans spaces. Beyond that, there's this really weird break in experiences that I feel where my perspective is informed entirely by a deep level of introspection and deconstruction. I was presented with binary options, and to arrive at the thought or feeling of being trans, I had to dig in really deep to try to take it apart so I could understand why I felt like I did. It was tough and it was scary. I made a lot of mistakes, but I got here on my own, and with that journey or process came a lot of introspection and self-awareness. Because I question everything, because I question myself, I have answers to all sorts of weird internal questions and a basis by which to reason most gender-related things. This is one of those things I find is so severely and sorely lacking from any self-avowed trans spaces these days, personally. The term that used to get tossed around a lot was hugbox, and I think that's kind of what they all inevitably became. No questioning, no introspection, no ability to just be wrong. It's just a continuous outpouring of external validation for anyone, except the dumb autistic motherfuckers like me who actually ask questions. The idiots who walk in and go, "So, I don't understand this," and aren't content with, "That's just how it is," as a hand-wavy answer. I feel like the whole toxic positivity culture is doing nothing other than ruining anyone's chances of forming a reasonable, grounded sense of self. They never have a reason to. Reminds me a lot of your commentary on therapy, with the idea that if you're going to therapy for 10 years and there's no breakthrough, your therapy isn't fucking working, because the point of it should be to get you to a reasonable place where you can take care of yourself, and the same here. The point of a support community is to give you tools, perspectives, and support so you can eventually not need that support group anymore, or maybe so that you can be strong enough to support more people, but that's not what these things become. They're more like a perpetual state of endless validation that protects anyone and everyone from the horrors of even the tiniest fraction of introspection. Folks will tolerate anyone and anything, except for someone who dares ever upset the established status quo or deviate even slightly from the script. Like, goddamn, do you know how many gapes and guffaws you earn just by going, "I'm not a literal communist, actually, I'm like a sockdem at most"? Anyone that claims to be trans-inclusive, all of your thoughts, experiences, and ideas are the utmost important to us, only so long as they're things that reinforce what we already think is true.
As more and more Hearthstone expansions get released, the amount of power creep in the game gets exponentially bigger compared to what it was back in Hearthstone Classic. But how much power creep has there been in the game? And I want to ask the viewers of this video, do you think too much power creep is a bad thing, or do you want to continue seeing Hearthstone keep expanding the power level of cards? Starting off with Chillwind Yeti, a 4-mana 4/5 vanilla neutral minion, this card has been power creeped a lot. Circus Amalgam not only decided to add taunt to its text, but it decided that it could be all types of minions just to showcase how lame the Yeti is. But the evolution continues on with cards like Groundskeeper, a 4-mana 4/5 Druid and Shaman card that has taunt, but this time there is a battle cry that if you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, you restore 5 health. There's also the Ice Revenant, which is an elemental, and whenever you cast a frost spell, this gains +2/+2. There was Omega Devastator, a 4-mana 4/5 warrior mech. Battlecry, if you have 10 mana crystals, deal 10 damage to a minion. This one is disgusting compared to Yeti. We have Boulder Fist Ogre, a 6-mana 6/7 vanilla neutral minion, all the way back from Hearthstone Classic, that got just completely dismantled with Armored Goon and Koldara Drake, which makes Armored Goon or Koldara Drake the best card in the game, because not only is that great stats for the cost, they also have a benefit. Lord of the Arena, a 6-mana 6/5 neutral vanilla minion, got completely dismantled from Baron Scavenger, which is a 6-mana 6/6 warlock card that has taunt, 1 extra health, but cost 1 while your deck has 10 or fewer cards. Just straight on spitting on Lord of the Arena for being such a bad card. But it only gets worse from here, because we have Hammer of Naru, a 6-mana 3/3 paladin weapon. But